"You're not even her real granddaughter." My father spat, his face contorted with rage. "Only blood relatives deserve the family fortune." I stood frozen in grandmother Eleanor's study, the heavy oak shelves filled with leather-bound classics, surrounding us like silent witnesses to his cruelty. My grandmother had been buried only 3 days ago, and already the family was fracturing over her will. "What are you talking about?" I managed, my voice barely audible over the thundering of my heart. "Don't play innocent, Jennifer. Your mother's little secret isn't so secret anymore." He paced the oriental rug, pausing to glare at the formal portrait of grandmother hanging above the fireplace. Eleanor was obsessed with bloodlines. "Once the lawyer confirms you've got no Blackwell blood, you'll get nothing." I looked him directly in the eyes, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Do you promise to keep your word about this? That only blood relatives deserve grandmother's inheritance?" "Absolutely," he declared, lifting his chin with the same imperious tilt I'd seen countless times throughout my childhood. "I'll make sure the family legacy stays with real Blackwells, not imposters. My name is Jennifer Blackwell. I'm 27 years old, and until 5 minutes ago, I believed Douglas Blackwell was my biological father. Now standing in my grandmother's Georgian mansion in suburban Philadelphia, I was apparently discovering otherwise. What I wanted was simple: the fair treatment grandmother Eleanor intended in her will. She had specifically mentioned me, her only granddaughter, during our last conversation about her estate plans. Standing in my way was the man who had always viewed me with thinly veiled contempt, the man whose approval I had spent decades trying to earn unsuccessfully. "You can attend the will reading next week if you must," he continued dismissively, "but don't expect anything. I've already spoken with Harrison about challenging any provisions that include you." Harrison Mills was my father's longtime friend and our family attorney. The mention of their apparent collusion sent a chill through me. "I'll be there," I replied quietly. "Grandmother wanted me there." "Sentiment," he scoffed. "Eleanor always had a blind spot for you. Fortunately, the law cares about facts, not feelings." As he strode from the room, I sank into grandmother's desk chair, running my fingers over the polished walnut surface where she had written countless letters, reviewed business documents, and most recently finalized her will. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "We need to talk about your father tonight alone." I stared at the message, unease crawling up my spine. If my father wasn't my biological father, then who was? And how had this secret remained hidden for 27 years? More importantly, why was it surfacing now, just days after grandmother's death and days before her fortune would be distributed? Whatever truth awaited me, one thing was becoming clear: the father I had spent my life trying to please had been harboring resentment far deeper than I had ever realized. Growing up as a Blackwell meant navigating a world of privilege and weighty expectations. The Blackwell fortune, built on pharmaceutical patents and shrewd investments, had sustained 3 generations of the family in considerable luxury. My father, Douglas, was the elder of 2 sons, which automatically positioned him as the presumptive heir to the majority of the Blackwell assets. His younger brother, James, had been the family rebel, brilliant, but restless, unwilling to conform to our grandfather's rigid vision of the family legacy. He'd left Philadelphia to pursue medical research in Seattle, returning only occasionally for major family events. My memories of Uncle James were limited, but warm, his easy laugh thoughtful, gifts, and the way he'd speak to me as though my opinions mattered. In contrast, my relationship with my father had always been strained. Douglas Blackwell was a man who measured worth in achievements and status. My brothers, Thomas and William, had fulfilled his expectations admirably, Thomas following him into the family business, William excelling in law school. I, however, had disappointed him at every turn. "She lacks the Blackwell drive," he'd remarked to my mother when he thought I couldn't hear. "Too soft, too unfocused." Despite graduating with honors and establishing a promising career in historical preservation, nothing I accomplished seemed to meet his standard. I'd attributed this perpetual disappointment to sexism or perhaps unrealistic expectations, never imagining there might be a more fundamental reason for his distance. Grandmother Eleanor had been my sanctuary, unlike my father. She valued my interest in history and art, encouraging me to pursue a path that honored my passions rather than family tradition. During my undergraduate years, I'd visit her estate every Sunday for tea, listening to her stories of family history and her own quiet rebellions against the constraints placed on women of her generation. "Remember, Jennifer," she often told me, "a Blackwell makes their own path." Her death at 86 had been peaceful, but left an emptiness I was still struggling to navigate. The knowledge that I'd lost my greatest advocate within the family made her absence even more profound. In the days following her funeral, I'd noticed subtle changes in my father's behavior, heightened scrutiny when I interacted with other family members, hushed conversations with Harrison Mills that abruptly ended when I entered a room. I dismissed these observations as grief manifesting in different ways, but now they took on a more sinister significance. The last time I'd seen grandmother alive, she'd held my hand with surprising strength and whispered, "Trust your instincts. Jennifer, not everything is as it appears." At the time, I'd attributed her cryptic words to medication or fatigue. Now, I wondered if she'd been trying to prepare me for the storm that was about to break over our family. As I left grandmother's study to meet my mother, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into a family drama decades in the making, one with roots deeper than I could yet comprehend. My mother was waiting for me at her favorite cafe, tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, where Blackwells were just ordinary people. She looked smaller somehow, her usually impeccable appearance slightly disheveled, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. "I never wanted you to find out this way," she began without preamble, her fingers nervously turning her wedding band. "Your father, Douglas, shouldn't have told you like that. It was cruel and self-serving." "So, it's true?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "He's not my biological father?" She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. "It's complicated, Jennifer. More complicated than Douglas makes it sound." Over the next hour, my mother unraveled a story that upended everything I thought I knew about my family. She and James, my uncle, had been in love before she met Douglas. They'd been young, passionate, and planning a future together when James received a prestigious research fellowship in Seattle. "We agreed he should go," she explained. "It was an incredible opportunity. We thought we could manage the distance, but the separation had strained their relationship, and during a particularly difficult period, she'd grown close to Douglas, who had always admired her from afar. A moment of vulnerability led to a brief relationship. One she ended when she realized her heart still belonged to James. When I discovered I was pregnant, I was certain it was James's child. The timing aligned perfectly with his last visit home." Her voice trembled, but Douglas insisted the child was his, and James was already engaged to someone else by then. I didn't want to disrupt his new life. Douglas had proposed immediately, presenting their marriage as the honorable solution. Only later did my mother realize that his interest had never been entirely about her. The Blackwell fortune had strict inheritance provisions that favored male heirs with legitimate children. "He needed a wife and children to secure his position," she said bitterly. "And I needed stability for my baby. It seemed like the best option." At the time, years passed, and the secret held. James eventually moved back to Philadelphia with his wife, but they remained childless. When his marriage ended in divorce, he threw himself into medical research, becoming increasingly distant from family affairs. "Did James ever know?" I asked. "No," my mother whispered. "I couldn't bear to disrupt his life again." And as the years passed, it seemed cruel to reveal the truth. The revelation left me reeling. Every memory of childhood now required re-examination. My father's coldness, Uncle James's warmth during his rare visits, Grandmother Eleanor's special attention to me. "Why is Douglas revealing this now?" I finally asked. My mother's expression hardened. "Your grandmother's will. He's always been obsessed with the Blackwell fortune, and now he's worried Eleanor might have left you a significant portion. He needs to discredit your claim. But if I'm not a blood Blackwell, that's just it," she interrupted. "You are a Blackwell by blood, just not Douglas's child. You're James's daughter, which makes you Eleanor's granddaughter by blood regardless." The irony was almost too perfect. My father's attempt to cut me out of the inheritance by denying our biological connection. might actually strengthen my claim through a different branch of the family tree. What do I do now? I asked, feeling adrift in this new reality. My mother reached across the table to clasp my hands. That depends on what you want, Jennifer. Justice, acknowledgement, or simply your fair share of what Eleanor intended for you. I didn't have an answer yet. The betrayal was too fresh, the implications too vast to process in a single conversation. But as from Eleanor's direct line, which flows through her son, Douglas, to his legitimate heirs, it was the opening we needed. James stood slowly, commanding the room's attention. I believe we need to examine the precise language of the trust, he said. My understanding is that it requires beneficiaries to be blood descendants of Harold Blackwell, Eleanor's father. If that's the case, we have a significant problem. Harrison frowned. What problem? Douglas is not biologically a Blackwell, James stated clearly. He was adopted as an infant, a fact our parents kept private to protect him, but which Eleanor was aware of. The silence that followed was deafening. Douglas's face drained of color as he stared at his brother in naked shock. That's absurd, he finally sputtered. A desperate lie. I have the adoption records. James continued implacably, and DNA confirmation. He produced another folder. If we're applying a strict bloodline test, as Douglas insists, then I am Eleanor's only biological child, and Jennifer, as my biological daughter, is her only blood grandchild. Harrison looked stricken as he examined the documents, his loyalty to Douglas visibly wearing with his professional obligations. This is outrageous, Douglas shouted, rising from his chair. I won't stand for this slander. You're the one who insisted only blood relatives deserve the Blackwell fortune. I reminded him quietly. Are you retracting that position now? Before Douglas could respond, the library doors opened to reveal a frail but determined Bernard Walsh, grandmother's personal attorney, leaning on a cane. I apologize for my tardiness, he said, nodding to me. I believe my presence is required for this reading. Harrison's dismay confirmed our suspicion. Bernard's unexpected recovery threatened whatever legal maneuvering Douglas had orchestrated in his absence. I would like to review the documents before proceeding, Bernard insisted, his experienced gaze already noting the tension filling the room. As Bernard settled at the table with the various test results and adoption papers spread before him, Douglas looked truly afraid for the first time. Whatever scheme he had constructed with Harrison was rapidly unraveling, but his desperation made him unpredictable and potentially dangerous. Bernard adjusted his reading glasses. As he reviewed the final pages of grandmother's will, his voice steady and authoritative. Before addressing specific bequests, I must draw attention to a letter Eleanor Blackwell instructed me to read. If questions of lineage rose during this proceeding, he opened a sealed envelope, the Blackwell crest embossed on heavy cream paper. The room fell silent as he began to read. To my family gathered here. If this letter is being read, then the secret I have kept for decades has finally surfaced. I have always known that Douglas was not born of Blackwell blood, but was welcomed into our family through adoption, a noble act of love by my husband and myself after years of heartbreak. I have also known since the moment I first held her that Jennifer is James's biological daughter. A grandmother knows her own blood. The Blackwell trust established by my father requires blood relation for principal inheritance. Having anticipated potential conflict, I have restructured my personal assets, which constitute the majority of what you now call the Blackwell fortune, to reflect my wishes rather than outdated notions of bloodline purity. To Douglas, you have been my son in every way that matters, but your treatment of Jennifer, your brother's child, has revealed a character that dishonors the Blackwell name you so jealously guard. By your own insistence on blood qualification, you have disqualified yourself from what you most covet. Bernard paused, looking directly at Douglas, whose face had gone ashen. In accordance with Eleanor's explicit instructions, Bernard continued, and in light of the DNA evidence presented today confirming both Douglas's adoption and Jennifer's parentage, the distribution is as follows. The trust assets requiring Blackwell bloodline pass to James Blackwell and his biological daughter Jennifer. Eleanor's personal estate will be distributed according to the specific bequests outlined here. Douglas lunged for the documents, But Bernard calmly shifted them away. "You promised," Douglas shouted at me, desperation breaking through his composed facade. "You said only blood relatives deserve the fortune." "No," I corrected him quietly. "You said that. I merely asked if you would keep your word about it, and you promised you would." The justice of this moment wasn't in the inheritance itself, but in watching Douglas's carefully constructed reality crumble under the weight of his own hypocrisy. The aftermath of the will reading unfolded like the final act of a Greek tragedy. Douglas, undone by his own machinations, stormed from the mansion, shouting threats of legal challenges that everyone present knew would fail. Harrison Mills followed, his professional reputation in tatters after Bernard revealed his knowledge of the adoption records he had deliberately concealed. My brothers, stunned by the revelations, approached me uncertainly. Thomas, always the more sensitive of the two, spoke first. "I had no idea about any of this," he said quietly. "All those years, the way he treated you, it makes a terrible kind of sense now." William nodded soberly. "For what it's worth, you've always been our sister. That hasn't changed." Their sincerity moved me more than I expected. They had been shaped by Douglas, too, in different ways. Perhaps there was a relationship worth salvaging there. Given time, Mother approached next, relief and apprehension mingling in her expression. "I should have told you years ago," she said. You were protecting me. I finished for her. I understand that now." The most profound conversation came later that evening when James and I sat in grandmother's study. Surrounded by the books and artifacts of a family history we were both rewriting in our minds. "What will you do now?" he asked, the weight of mist, years heavy in his voice. "Build something new," I answered simply. "We can't recover the time we lost, but perhaps we can create something better going forward." He smiled, the expression so similar to my own that I wondered how I hadn't seen the resemblance before. "I'd like that very much." As we talked into the night, sharing stories and discovering connections, I felt grandmother's presence in the room. Her wisdom, her foresight, her absolute certainty that truth would eventually prevail. She had arranged everything perfectly, ensuring that justice would be served without requiring me to deliver it personally. In the end, Douglas's downfall came not from my actions, but from his own character revealed under pressure. He had spent decades ensuring I felt like an outsider in the family, never suspecting that he was the true outsider all along. The irony was perfect and perfectly sufficient as I looked toward the future, a future that included a father who actually wanted me in his life. I realized that was the greatest inheritance of all.